Good evening, councillors, officers, members of the public. Welcome to this evening's meeting of Children, Young Person and Education Scrutiny Committee. Please be aware this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the council's YouTube channel, and I also welcome those viewers online. Can I request that mobile phones are either set to silent or switched off for the duration of this meeting? Can I also take this time to remind members regarding the procedure for tonight's agenda. Should members of the Scrutiny Committee wish to amend, remove or add additional recommendations or request as part of the Scrutiny Committee's remit, then please can I ask members to state and propose their recommendations at the appropriate time during debate, and a seconder then to confirm the recommendation. Members will then vote on the additional amendment recommendation as necessary. Members, can I kindly ask that all members be mindful of when preparing questions and comments to ensure that each item received appropriate attention and scrutiny within the time available. Should the meeting run past, it's not going to tonight, should it run past, then we will then take a vote on it, and I'll let you know when the meeting will then come to a close. So if we move on then for apologies, please, Raj.
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Paul Brooke.
Thank you very much. Get well soon, Paul. Can declarations of any interests over tonight's procedures? Only my normal one. I am a foster carer, or my wife is, so therefore I have an interest in this here, but it in no way reflects on my thoughts and everything else. We move on then. Minutes that were held on the 8th of September 2025. Can I please ask members if they're happy that those are a true and accurate recording? And can I seek a proposer and a seconder to accept these minutes? Councillor Jessup and Councillor Egan to second it. Eglin. Always get it wrong. And all in favour? Passed. Moving on to agenda item number 4. Analysis of the 2025 educational outcomes. Can I please invite Mr. Simon Bessett, Head of Education Efficiency, and to introduce his report, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is analysis of the 2025 educational outcomes. I will clarify that some of the data has yet to be verified, so therefore some of the data that we allude to in Key Stage 4 is not what we call validated data, because what that means is that the schools and settings are able to challenge those on remarks, etc. So therefore they may not yet be what we call validated data. So we try not to make too many assumptions based on that, because it does allow for feedback from schools before we actually can make any real judgments from those. But the truth is that they very rarely change significantly. But it's just for councillors to be aware. The simple analysis of the 2025 educational outcomes is that unfortunately the local authority is not above any national standard in any educational outcome. That's quite a stark piece of information to deliver right at the beginning, but neither is there a good 3-year trend in any particular area. I guess if you're looking for some crumb of comfort, I would say that what has happened in relation to the teaching of children with EHCPs and those with SEND support has improved over time. And I think that probably reflects the fact that a lot of our settings are dealing with a very diverse community, and are meeting the needs of those children within those settings and are getting increasingly skilled at that. Unfortunately, what I would have to add to that is that there is a considerable gap between the achievement of those children and all other children. And also, if you consider what that would be from national, there is also a gap between Northamptonshire children and the national. So unfortunately, even though there's a gap between the children within our county, there is also a gap between all of our children and the national. I think there are, if you were to be really simplistic about it, our children start off doing less well when the early years. Phonics is reasonably well taught, and our outcomes there seem to be reasonably consistent. I think that's because it's a very simple delivery system, and if you follow that to the letter using systematic synthetic phonics, then generally it's a sort of delivery model that can be imposed and scrutinised and used to effect. So therefore, the rather simplistic achievement of phonics, I don't underestimate it. It helps a lot of our children read. But when it gets to more complicated skills like Key Stage 2 SATs, where they have to use a multiplicity of disciplines, and then when we go on to Key Stage 4 data, unfortunately, their poor beginnings are masked even magnified even further, and therefore we fall even further behind the national picture. What I would say about that is we recognise that there's a lot of work for us to do with our settings, and we've really prioritised through our education improvement framework about how we try and start our children off with the best possible starts. I'm really excited about some of the work that Family Hub Partnerships will do with that, but also my early years team and I have been working, with this in mind about getting the best possible start in life. I'm pleased to say that we've had quite a bit of work together with settings and with other agencies about getting that best start in life. Our belief is that if we make sure there isn't a gap at the very early stages, we can really monitor that throughout Key Stage 2. There is a lot of work to do with some of our settings about better relationships and the school-to-school support that needs to happen from that. I've been having chats this week with the Department for Education about some of the improvement work that needs to go on there. And it is all about rebuilding the relationship between the local authority and our schools to be able to have influence and learn where there's good practice and propagate that. As it stands at the moment, we don't do that well enough, but that is what our education improvement framework is designed to do. I think at that point I'll probably stop and see if there are any questions.
Do you want me to?
No.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you. I think you hit the nail on the head about relationships, but I think that relationship goes further than the local authority relationship with the school. It's about the school, parent, carer, and the pupil themselves. I think that's enormously important, and to know what is expected of everyone in that partnership. But reading the report, some of my questions have been answered, some I've sort of put on earlier. But particularly in phonics, and I know you mentioned that, the academies are attaining almost level with national average. So what is it that the academies are doing that local authority maintained schools aren't? And is it something that we can follow?
My simple answer to that would be it's a compliance regime. And so in an academy, there is much stricter control over that compliance. Possibly might characterise that by more draconian enforcement systems. That may not necessarily be true in every setting, but certainly what I've seen, there is a very strict adherence. And because it's compliance and measurable, academies are better at doing that than some of our maintained schools. There's a bit more relaxed attitude towards phonics. That may not be true in every setting, but that's how I would characterise it. And probably through a better training regime as well. A lot of academies comply with subscribe to national college training, so they will be very strict about that. And again, a lot of them will use Read Write Inc, which again is a very strict system about enforcement of the use of systematic synthetic phonics.
So is that something that the local authority maintained schools could emulate?
I think there's a bit of leeway with our maintained schools over that, and we try to encourage and cajole. Yeah, I think, yeah, potentially there's something we could do more about that. And again, I did one of the things I've talked about that relationship. You're right. It is about with the parents and the carers, but I also think it's about school to school support. Where is that working well? And we don't do that bit of our academy schools supporting our maintained schools and vice versa well enough.
That was going to be my next question, so thank you.
Vicky?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Just to pick up on that school to school support, can you just explain what is working there and what could work better?
Yeah. Amanda, did you want to come in before that?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to, if I can come back on your point initially, I think there's a recognition that there is work to do around relational practice with schools and with trusts, and post-COVID that hasn't necessarily reconfigured where it was before. So there has been a lot of work around developing local leadership networks and around CEO sessions, around ensuring that, first of all, we accept where perhaps we have been and where we haven't, I suppose, been effective. Those relationships are improving. We're now sort of 9-10 months into those meetings, and I think that's been really helpful, and they will continue throughout. I think that there is a need to focus on the 0 to 5 space. I was at a SEND workshop yesterday with parents, and I think if you can get that trust early on, then more likely to have families that move with you and work with you, as opposed to trying to pick that up in the secondary space when actually families maybe already feel that they're being done to or they feel failed. So I think a lot of the work trying to tie up the family hubs and that 0 to 5 space with our early years improvement framework, and with looking at how we support and work with SEND support and specialist systems as well. So trying to really get that early help and that early identification in, so that families also perhaps don't feel that they need to go to an EHCP either. They feel that they've got the support there. But I think that's the key bit there, is that relational piece. And I think there was a focus on phonics last year within the school improvement system, but again it sort of comes down to capacity as well. When you've got sort of a 2.8 full-time equivalent with 30 schools, and there was a 1.6 FE equivalent with 420 early years providers. So again, that's a very big ask. However, there's been a real commitment to resource those spaces, and then now our 6 early childcare advisors who are actually going out to the 420 settings and supporting with that, which will, I think, make it a real difference. And going back to Simon's point about that sort of good learning development, which is what you'll get at the end of reception, and then the phonics. Speech is nationally a challenge, and communication literacy and communication language needs are recognised nationally as being low. The change in sort of the child's experience as they're growing, and that focus on maybe digital as opposed to conversational has impacted that. So young people are arriving and they're not ready. So again, there's a big drive from the government, but also locally and nationally around that school readiness. So all of that piece of work, we're working with health, we're working with local area partners, and we're working to ensure that we're focusing where possible on that early identification in that 0 to 5 space, so that again, children arrive able to converse better. Because part of the early years foundation stage is around personal and social emotional development. If a child isn't able to sit and access, then they can't learn in the same way. That doesn't take away from neurodiverse spaces, but again, you need to be at a certain level of readiness to be able to engage with your peers. And I think that's the piece of work that we're trying to tie together, so that we can get young people arriving, not necessarily school ready, because I don't think it's necessary, but I think it's more about the child being ready. I think the language could do with being different, but it's about the child being ready for the next stage of their journey, and that's the piece of work that we're trying to work across the local area partnership on.
Thank you. That's really good to hear, because actually if you don't get that right, even as a child progresses through their education, you're behind all the time, aren't you? Thank you.
Okay, to answer the question about school-to-school support, yeah. So schools are quite organic organisations, and sometimes through their life they're better at some things than others. And so what you tend to find is that if there's an area of good practice within our schools, they tend to shine in that area and self-identify. What we're trying to work on is, where are those areas of good practice? Quality assure them, so that we can be absolutely sure that we can propagate that good practice and share that amongst our schools, so that overall, the whole school estate gets better at certain things. So, for example, they might be very good at teaching humanities because they've got a particularly good scheme of work, or they've got a series of lesson plans, and sharing that amongst schools, along with some of the pedagogy that will go with that, will enable all of our schools to get better. But what we don't have at the moment is enough of a system to propagate that school support and quality assure it, which obviously you can see is a risk for a local authority to recommend something that we haven't quality assured, because it could have negative connotations.
Can I just come in a little bit more? Because obviously, thank you. What we are also doing around school-to-school support is the last couple of years we've been trying triads. So whether you're a maintained or an academy, schools working together to see actually what strengths they can bring from each other. Perhaps an outstanding setting, working with a school that in the old money requires improvement. So working to build that. And part of the desire really is about having that community focus, which is a real drive nationally as well at the moment, so that you're looking at your community, whether you're an academy or a maintained school, but you're working together really on the demographic of what you are, and what you're supporting, because really schools need to support the community that they serve. And if our communities are changing and we will have additional needs in our community, we need to adapt to that to be successful. So that's the piece of work that's going on around the Education Improvement Framework, which came in September. So it's around recognising support, around making connections. We only have 28 maintained schools and 4 nurseries now, so there's like 111 academies, and 23 trusts that include standalone schools. So it's really important that we create those relationships for those schools, because because we have so many trusts, you could have 2 or 3 trusts in Corby, for example, but actually their local connection would be maintained schools, and equally vice versa. So it's about creating those networks again, which is where the locality leadership networks have come in really positively. Equally, last week we held a conference, which we haven't done for a long time, around leadership, and in the same space we had secondary and primary heads, and they haven't done that for a long time. And there was a lot of talk about transition, whether that's preschool to school, and then infant to junior, and then you've got obviously Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3, and then post-16. A lot of conversation around how we can make that better, because we see children falling off. You'll get that from Sarah's report later. Key Stage 3, you find children are actually perhaps elective home educated, or their persistent absence increases, or actually there's suspensions and there's exclusions grow. Because again, it's a pinch point where young people feel overwhelmed by the environment, and often behaviours or their perception of demands increases, leading to them finding the space more challenging. Again, going back to what Simon sort of mentioned about relational practice and the new RAISE programme as well, which is around inclusive and successful education. So it's part of the jigsaw, but again, we have some schools that have some fantastic practice, irrespective of whether they're an academy or a maintained, and it's about utilising that and bringing the trust together so that we can create a space where, obviously as a local authority, we have a duty of care to everybody, irrespective of whether they're maintained or academy. So it's really important that we create as many opportunities to influence and as many opportunities to talk about what's going well, so that we can then bring up the schools perhaps where it is more challenging. And there are localities where it is more challenging. Our Corby data shows that Corby actually is a space where the children are achieving less. There are some slight improvements, but again, it's around that early sort of reception data, and the Key Stage 2 data does show that Corby is a slightly more challenging space for schools and for young people.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, Trevor.
Perfect, thank you. Good evening, Simon. A couple of questions, a couple of points to raise. Within the report you've submitted for us to review, all the data starts at 22-23, and then onwards from there. So we've got 3 years. Is that generally how the report's done? Is it 3 rolling years, or is there data from previous the school year 21 ended 21-22?
Yeah, there would be plenty of previous data, but we normally only work on a 3-year trend. That's just generally the way we work in education.
Okay, I think it would have been really useful potentially to have that early year, if you had it, particularly with how many new councillors we've got in this year that haven't seen any of this previously. It might have been useful to see a longer trend, because all we're seeing is obviously this little peak where 22-23 was showing not good, which we would expect because that was post-COVID. then it went up a little bit, which you expect because 22-23 was so far down, but now it's showing a trend of going back down. That's concerning, unless we can analyse that further back potentially. Might have been useful if you could have done that.
But it's just mindful for councillors to know that obviously during COVID there wasn't any reporting of data. So the last data you would have had was 2019. So there's a gap anyway, because 2020 and 21, there was no reporting because there weren't any tests. So that's why often you'll see that just 3-year trend. We can go back to 2019, but obviously it's a significant gap. So
then just following up on that, I said, have there been any alterations in the way the data is captured? Is it each year is it exactly the same? Is it just based on those results at the end of the Key Stage 2, SATs, etc.? Is it just the same data you're capturing each year? So is it directly comparable?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to say they're directly comparable. Obviously, the tests aren't the same, and some of those elements have changed. For example, about writing assessment is actually done by teacher assessment, whereas previously it was done under a test regime, but that has changed for a number of years now. So generally, they're comparable. You could argue the difference, but really you'd be challenged to say that, because actually the idea is that the curriculum is taught and they're tested on the curriculum. Obviously, they can't test them on the whole of the curriculum at various points, just like they wouldn't on a syllabus for a subject. So generally, they are pretty comparable, yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. You want to? Sorry, go on, Julie. Off you go. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Chair. Did you say that some areas like Corby have a higher incidence of a lower?
Yes, so data shows us that from an early setting, so from early phonics, for early good learning developments, this is preschool, that there are already indicators that performance is lower than other localities. So that's why quite a lot of the Family Hub work has been focused around Corby and around early language, around different models around Easy Peasy and Welcome, which is all focusing on communication. So there's been some additional funding around supporting Corby in that space. So whilst all localities present as being lower, that there are some aspects, as I say, like Corby, where it is more of a challenge. And what we've done as well is try and work with family hubs and try and work with early years providers about targeting support in those spaces. So we've looked at the data from nursery schools around those children that have achieved a good learning development at the age of 5. And then targeting support for those 10 nurseries, for example, that perhaps have got the lowest outcomes, because ultimately there's an expectation by the government that all councils and all children in the whole of the UK will get to what they call a 75.6% good learning development. And that's the standard for early years learning, and that sets them up for what they would say would be a good trajectory. However, as a council, we're on 67%. So there's quite a big ask. But then that's the same for the East Midlands, and that's the same for quite a lot of councils, is that their data is much lower. So for us, for example, that would be a rise of 8%. Whilst we've seen a growth of a percentage each year, we're not going to get to that by summer 28. But the minimum they've accepted is 70%. But again, that's going to be a big ask. So it's about trying to work with those families with health visitors, looking at the 2.5-year checks, looking what we can do in early years settings. To also support that further, we've brought in training in a traded service. So we're now, through our early years dedicated schools grant, offering free training for all providers between 0 to 5, so childminders, private voluntary nurseries, and anywhere where you've got the early years support, so that we can target SEND support, we can target inclusive environments, we can try and improve the quality assurance of that 0 to 5 space through free training, so that hopefully childminders feel better supported and able to, progress and provide a greater offer really for the young people in their care, so that then when they move towards school, they're more able to access the provision and then achieve that good learning development.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Steve.
Looking at the data, there seems to be, as you mentioned, Corby is one area which is relatively underperforming. How much of this is down to factors outside the school's control, so economic development, turnover of people, minority groups, and therefore there is a certain additional challenge placed in some areas to meet these figures? How important is that as a factor?
I'll come in, and then Simon, if you want to come in. I think Corby is an area of high social sort of demographic. There is, I suppose, one of need and deprivation in comparison to perhaps others. I don't think it's any necessary to do with any specific group, but it's just to do with the general need in that space, in a sense of employment, attainment, aspirations, etc. So I think, and also, some of the factors are more sort of long-term. If you're thinking about employment and young people, we don't have a university, so young people leave, let's say 18, and go off and explore elsewhere, come back, and perhaps they come back into lower paid jobs. Again, you've got that cycle that perhaps repeats itself. You've got to think about the aspirations within the space. But I think the data shows us that young people and those younger than 5 are accessing school with lower communication skills, are accessing school with a greater level of need. So the work that we're doing, as I say, is trying to link up with those 2 and 2.5-year-old checks with health visitors, so that if there is a need, we can spot that early, and we can link that with that early identification and early help, so that we're getting the right support at the right time, for the right place for the young person and the family. So in short, it's a mixture of reasons to do with demographic, to do with need, to do with deprivation, and to do with aspiration and opportunity. So it'd be interesting as well to do a piece of work around employment as well within that space. So it's very difficult in 6 hours to support children to make all of that journey, which is what schools are faced with. So it is about, hence, getting that 0 to 5 offer better supported, so that families feel better supported. It's looking at parental literacy, it's looking at support for getting people into work and raising their own aspirations and their own ability to access learning and employment. So it's more of a bigger picture for a parental point of view and carer point of view, but it's trying to triangulate that, so it's a big job, but I think it's part of the jigsaw. But schools only have children for a very young amount of the day, and the same with early years, so it's about trying to make that the best that we can, and we've still got a way to go. But again, there's a wider factor that I think that impacts on that.
And one further question. There's a multitude of schools, different organisations, and inevitably, perhaps, sometimes they don't necessarily talk to one another. So what's come out from my little conversation here tonight is there's an importance for someone in their helicopter, so to speak, to share those practices. How much of that responsibility, in your opinion, should be taken by NNC?
I think that as a council, there's a duty of care to all the young children within NNC, irrespective, as I said, whether they're in an academy or in a maintained school. The challenge is, as a service, especially education effectiveness and education, is that we don't have a direct mandate in the same way as we would do with a local authority school. So all we can really do is influence and try and conduct, really. So provide those spaces where like-minded people can be together, and equally, if they're not like-minded, you're creating those opportunities for professional dialogue. So I think the CEO sessions that have started, the locality leadership sessions that are underway, the introduction of an improved training and traded service means that we're able to offer training for teachers and for staff and for aspiring leaders. I think that's part of a measure that will help us to improve and to create those opportunities. But I think it's being realistic that we can only influence a certain way. However, if we don't keep working on and giving young people those opportunities, especially disadvantaged learners and SEND learners, then we create a space where children have less opportunity when they leave, and we're not preparing young people for the transition into adulthood, which ultimately, in an economies of scale, is going to cost the council more money in the long run, really. So it's about trying to get it right at the earliest point, because then we have young people that leave school better equipped, and then hopefully we have families that subsequently, when they have their own children, they're better equipped. So I think it's about trying to, again, I know there's deficits and there's a challenge around finances, but wherever possible, front-loading that early offer and that early help work will ultimately pay dividends, I think.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'll just add something there. I've been to 3 schools today. It's only anecdotal, but all 3 of those schools are keen to know what's happening elsewhere, and they want to know what I think about those schools, yeah, because they trust the local authority to do some of that quality assurance work and understand what's going on. So I do think we have a responsibility in that to be the champion of children. I think it's eminently possible to do better than the national because other places have done it. Yeah, I think we just need to build that relationship with our schools where we can challenge where we think they've fallen below that standard, but they also know we're supporting them all the way in that by being kind to them, but also challenging at the same time and being able to spread that information that happens. And as Amanda pointed out, you know, I'm in charge of the early years team, and I'm incredibly fortunate that the number of members in that team have tripled because we know that we've got to get it right there. And the thing that we focus that on is our high level of support are in those areas where we need the most help.
Thank you very much. Trevor.
Thank you. The report itself is recommending that we support your team, the educational effectiveness team, to continue working and doing what you're doing. But with the trends in the chart showing that things are dropping off and things are getting worse, have you got any specific actions that you've got planned out that you're going to be taking that can support us in supporting you effectively? Because just based on this data to say, yeah, we recommend you keep doing what you're doing, it's, according to the data, what's being done isn't doing, and we're substantially off the national figures in most of those charts that you provide, most of that area you've provided.
Yeah, I think that's a fair challenge. What I would say is that relationship building has not really been the key focus of some of our work. It's been about that compliance and monitoring and those sorts of things. I think that we're now seeing that some of the events that Amanda's talked about, whereby we're trying to work in those triads of teams, we're trying to work together in order to build communities of practice. I think the fractured nature of the education setting as we sit at the moment with so many challenging trusts sitting around the local authority means there is no community of practice. So what we've done is we've kept a compliance model whereby we've not let it get much worse. Yeah, and so as a consequence, we try to support schools in what they've been doing, but only as individuals. And actually, I think what we've recognised is with the new education improvement framework, we've got to work on that basis of building communities of practice, as opposed to just checking that each individual setting is doing okay or is not falling too far below standard.
Can I come in, if that's okay, Chair? Just to say that up until September, NNC didn't have an education improvement framework, which is what you would find as a baseline elsewhere. So I think that's the biggest difference, which will drive the rigour, because that didn't exist before. So now you've got key 4 profiles where you've got your secure plus, your secure, and you're really looking to see how we can focus our efforts onto those vulnerables and those causing concern in line with DFE. So Department of Education. So I think that's a significant shift. There also wasn't a traded offer or a training brochure that really was leading CPD, so that continuous professional development, that's now in place. So these are key drivers where we can start to shape and hopefully improve recruitment and retention, because again, you're giving teachers the skills that they need to be successful, and you're offering that either subsidised or free. So I think that's where we've had to focus, and that's recognised nationally as being a way to go as well. We've also introduced exclusion and suspension guidance, which wasn't in place before, again, which all focuses on relational practice. And also Charlotte and the educational psychology team and outreach have been working on a RAISE programme, which is relational and inclusive successful education, again focusing on school relational practice and focusing on really belonging, because we want young people to feel that they belong irrespective of where they start. So I think all of that work will hopefully help to equip teachers to be more successful, gives opportunities for schools to work together irrespective of whether they're in a trust or not, and also gives opportunities for networking, and part of that training offers aspiring leaders, it offers mentoring to new head teachers, it offers a lot of opportunities for people to be successful, but equally to learn from their peers, because that coaching model, we hope, will bring in that. So, yes, it doesn't show an improving picture at the moment, but then these key pieces of documentation weren't in place. So I'd like to think that the Education Improvement Framework is a 3-year programme that will be reviewed at the end, so that's 25 to 28. I'd be confident in, I know it's 3 years' time, but that 2028, when you've seen that model work through, that you'll see schools that are more successful and you'll see data improve.
Okay, thanks for that. I appreciate that. It's really good feedback. So there's specific actions and things that have already taken place and already are taking place that you're expecting will then lead into this data and we can see improvements. But you obviously said it's a 3-year cycle. Are we waiting though for at the end of each year when they do the stats to see this data then, or are there markers in between and points to see that we're going in the right direction?
From a quality assurance point of view, the improvement framework gives us four judgments of schools, which are agreed with the school. But it enables us to risk assess, because that's what wasn't perhaps happening in the past, was that risk assessment and that rigour. So, from a local authority point of view, with the maintained schools that we have, the team will know which schools are vulnerable and which schools are causing concern. And that's more now aligned with data, because Ofsted up until recently had stopped assessing data, which you'll know whatever you don't measure doesn't get done. So we lost that internal dialogue and that opportunity to discuss and actually hold places to account. So Ofsted has brought that back in, but also its new framework that's released on Monday does have inclusion at its heart, because again, you can have good outcomes, but you can also perhaps not be inclusive. And actually our society needs to be inclusive, because we need to prepare young people and we need to be accepting, don't we, and tolerant. So I think all of that work I do feel will pay dividends, but you're not going to see your data until next year, because it's annual. We can have conversations internally, obviously with maintained schools, and we can see where they are. What we've also introduced this year is that all of the school effectiveness team, education effectiveness team, have been assigned with a trust, which wasn't happening before. So all the trusts now have a key person, and they've all had their first conversation, a meeting or a phone call, just to say, look, I'm here. I'm not here to do your improvement work, but I'm here to connect you to the local authority. And I think that, again, will bring fruit. And there's been meetings already that have taken place, and heads have really welcomed that connection, because ultimately they're part of NNC as well. And some of our trusts have quite a big footprint, so actually they can be all over the country, but we need them to feel rooted here, don't we, and to feel that community here. So I do feel that it will be a difference, but from a data point of view, you're only going to see that this time of year, every year.
Thank you very much. Andy?
Thank you, Chair. We've spoken about the challenges and the improvements needed this evening, but I think we do have to acknowledge the improvements at Key Stage 2 for children with HCPs in reading, writing and maths, not withholding the fact that we still further improvements, but there have been huge improvements, and I think we should congratulate all those who've been working in that area.
No, I agree with her, Wendy. I from experience realise that it is a challenge. I have 2 grandchildren. One was born 2020, and he doesn't call it sweets, he calls it candy. Very Americanised, and that's purely because of down to the COVID, and he's now just hitting school, where his older brother, who's 9, is totally different and is grasping and leaping forward all the time with reading and everything else. So I do appreciate 100% of what you're going through, and I do also appreciate the efforts that you're putting in with these other new things that you're introducing as well to identify those problems.
Yeah, I'd just like to put it on record that a lot of that was Amanda's work prior to my arrival. The risk assessment of maintained schools and the financial trip systems. Amanda's brought a lot of rigour to the education effectiveness team, which is going to enable it to move forward from there.
I now move to members. Is there anything you wish to amend? Oh, sorry.
Chairman, I was just going to suggest, if I may, that Scrutiny sees how the progress is going on. We don't wait 3 years, but we perhaps see an appropriate juncture. You come back again and tell us how you're getting on with the improvement plan.
Yeah,
if I may, Chair.
I'd be very hopeful that we could talk about improvement at this time next year, which will be the appropriate time for the same set of data to come out so you can see the same comparison.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's very useful. Are there any other amendments or recommendations among members that you, Mr. would like to raise? And also from yourself, Amanda?
I just wanted to add that we've introduced this year an Education and Aspiration Board, because that wasn't in place before, and Councillor Wright now chairs that, so we're on our 3rd session next week. That's also another opportunity to look at data. So in July we looked at 2024 data and really drilled down into what we could see, especially post-16. At the last session in October, we looked at SEND outcomes post-16, as well as looking at children in care and their outcomes. So that meets 6 times a year, so it'd be really helpful, I think, at various points for perhaps Councillor Wright and members to come back to feedback around that. But I would also echo that, Councillor Jessup, that actually annually this ideally is something that comes back anyway from a data point of view, because then you can track it and you can really forensically look at where we are and what the gaps are. But again, you've got this then as a mechanism, but then you've also got the Education Aspiration Board, which is all about the challenge and about developing and investigating. Next week there's papers being brought around education other than at school. So that's those young people with special educational needs that aren't accessing school in what we'd say a typical way. And there's also a paper being brought around elective home education. So again, that's another avenue for you also as members to scrutinise data and to see what's happening.
Yeah, thank you very much. Trevor?
Just one point in terms of the data that we've received and we've analysed here. Obviously, the breakdown is between maintained schools and trust schools. I can understand. Is there value in? Is data available for a breakdown more specifically of schools? And is that worthwhile us seeing so we can identify if there are specific schools that are maybe dragging down the overall figures, or is that likely to then alienate schools if they're not performing as well as others?
I think that would be probably a layer too far. I think those conversations are happening in trusts and those conversations are happening within the local authority. We have set up 2 groups who also meet every 6 weeks. So we've got what we would call RAMs, which is risk assessing maintained schools, and we look at schools forensically. And the team leads on that, and they also have wider members of education that attend. And we also have a task group, which is trust and academies causing concern. So again, wider members come to that session and talk about perhaps trusts or academies where perhaps we would like to see if we could support in any other way, whether that's around attendance or that's around outcomes. So we're trying to identify perhaps where there's a risk and then working with either the maintained or with the academy school to see how we can support really and ensure that NNC is part of hopefully the solution and the way forward.
Thank you very much. Is there any other amendments or anything else you'd like to look at? Moving on then, it is recommended that children, young people and Education Scrutiny Committee members firstly support the continued focus on the improvement of standards within the educational settings within Northants Council. In particular, local authorities maintain settings via the Education Improvement Framework, particularly focusing on the statutory duties. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Wendy? Vicky? And all those in favour? Carried. Also then, to support the work of the education efficiency team in their work as set out in the Education Improvements Framework and continue the development of the revised structure to assist this improvement work. Can I have a proposer? Wendy again. And a seconder? Morris. Thank you. All those in favour? Carried. And lastly, that we as a scrutiny committee for children, young people and education look at this and the data annually to see the improvements and to see where we were going over each year and see if we can have recommendations on that. So can I have a proposer and a seconder? Thanks, Julie. Seconder? Trevor? All those in favour? Carried. Moving on then, Agenda 5. Sorry about that. Firstly, thank you very much for all those in that debate. It was really useful and we've come up with some good strategies there. Moving on then, educational inclusion and partnership. Could I please invite Sarah Jones, please? Or Johnson, sorry.
Hiya, thank you. I'm Sarah Johnson. I am Head of Inclusion. I just wanted to give a quick summary and overview of the report that I've given. Essentially, we looked at attendance, exclusion and home education, elective home education across Northamptonshire. The message isn't particularly positive in terms of too many children are missing school, being suspended or leaving mainstream school, often because their needs aren't being met early enough. There are some green shoots. Some issues are showing strong inclusive practice, and that's reflected in some of the conversations we were talking about earlier. Permanent exclusions do remain low, even if suspensions are not. And the families that do choose to electively home educate, so from a positive perspective, actually they are generally well supported by the elective home education team. So the challenges. Persistent absence remains high and above pre-COVID levels. Children with additional needs, that includes things such as special educational needs, anxieties, or those with family challenges are those that are most effective. And attendance varies widely between schools. The most suspensions are in secondary academies, which you would expect, I think, generally speaking. But the children that are excluded often have unmet special educational needs and or social and emotional mental health needs as well. Whilst there has been some gains around the use of relational and trauma-informed practice, there is still an inconsistency which Northamptonshire Trust are addressing. Elective home education continues to rise, which matches the national picture. For many families, they report that it's from unmet needs or difficulties in school, not necessarily a true positive choice. And following from that, alternative provision and education other than at school. Demand is rising and the needs of children are more complex. Again, that reflects the national picture. The reintegration back to school is variable, and there's pieces of work that we're doing around that as well. Charlotte and I met today and we had some really positive conversations around that. There is pressure on the high needs block and the available AP alternative provision places as well. So, what does this mean? Well, these patterns show that children often disengage before they're ever excluded. We need earlier help, unsurprising for me to say that, more consistent inclusive practice and better support across schools, a local authority, and also integration with health and social care services. So I've proposed different elements, which is looking at a single joined-up inclusion improvement plan that brings together attendance, behaviour and alternative provision work. I think when we talk about them separately, we don't get the same kind of coherency and consistency across practice, which I'm really keen to not talk about things in silos. So we don't just talk about attendance, we talk about exclusions and we talk about AP, that actually we group them together as a kind of inclusion improvement plan instead. With this, want to look at the early identification and support for pupils at risk of absence, so really kind of drilling down in the data and seeing what are the drivers around children's poor attendance to school. Underpinned by relational and trauma-informed behaviour approaches in school. The continued oversight of elective home education, particularly in reference to the most recent serious case review of the little girl that was killed and the learning from that as well as supporting those children that are excluded, having clearer routes back to school. How do we make sure that schools feel confident that we're saying a child is ready to return to school? How do we identify and prove that, and working with the educational psychology team in regards to that? Those are the main points around that report. I know you're going to have lots of questions for me, and I hope to be able to answer them the best that I can. See, I told you there's going to be lots of questions.
We'll start with you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you very much for that excellent overview of the report. I just wanted to draw your attention to section 4.4. The report highlights that persistent absence remains strongly linked to pupils with additional needs and those facing social disadvantage. But the actions listed focus mainly on improving early identification, communication and attendance culture, which appear to target the symptoms rather than the deeper structural causes that drive the absence itself. We also know from Appendix A that Northamptonshire has failed to reach the national average in any key stage this year, and obviously good attendance in school is one of the strongest predictors of academic attainment. So given that some schools in the area already demonstrate this strong practice while others lag significantly behind, I heard you mention drilling down into the data earlier, but would you be able to clarify what the root causes of persistent absence are within Northamptonshire, why these underlying issues have not been addressed consistently across the system, and what specific steps will now be taken to ensure we tackle the causes, not just the symptoms, so that attendance improves in a way that lifts educational outcomes?
I think it's a great question. And the first part was, what causes persistent absence? I think if I knew the answer to that, I probably wouldn't be sitting here on a Tuesday evening. I think it's incredibly complex. And I think children are struggling around emotional-based school non-attendance, around anxiety. I think there's lots of children, and I think particularly in Northants, with children with special educational needs that are particularly struggling around their attendance. And that might be because they are struggling in school with social peer relationships. Parents are struggling to get them to school for various different reasons. It can be incredibly complex. And I think for each family and each child, it's going to be different. So then it's about how do we bring systemic change to make a real difference to lots of children without necessarily knowing the true answer for that particular child. And I think Simon and I think he would agree with me, hopefully he will, that we've working together to look at some of those risks and challenges around children at risk of exclusion, for example, children not attending, what does that mean and what does that look like? I think one part that we've done already, so I've been in the local authority for 6 weeks, and one of my kind of key phrases at the moment is working at pace, and one of those is about bringing those policies and processes into play. So one of those policies is around what's called our Section 19 duty, so children out of school, and how do we react quickly and promptly to that. The other bit was setting up and continuing what's called, we love an acronym in Northamptonshire, the COSY panel, which is children out of school and education, making sure that's set up, and children that might be too unwell to attend school, might have emotional-based school non-attendance, might not be in school for a whole host of reasons, that we work together from a multidisciplinary approach. Simon is also working hard setting up the children at risk of exclusion panel to make sure that we're identifying those children as quickly as possible and then moving at pace to support those on an individual level. So we've got those structures that are starting to come into place and those policies. We will not see the fruits of that for I would say easily another term. But what I would hope is that we're building confidence of our schools in the area, but also parents and families about how we're trying to address and support those children's needs around attendance. I think you had a number of questions. I don't think I've answered them all, so I apologise.
So the questions were why these underlying issues have not been addressed consistently across the system, and what specific concrete steps will now be taken to ensure we tackle the causes, not just the symptoms, so that attendance improves in a way that lifts education.
I think one of the reasons why it hasn't been addressed is I think that there's been a range of different members of staff taking this role. So Annette has been working, I think, 3 jobs as one person, and you can only do so much as an individual. So hopefully now the Northampton will be better supported for us to be able to work at pace. But I think it's about the transition of staff, it's about recruitment and retention, it's about making sure that the members of staff feel secure in the role and supported by the community, by schools, by counsellors and so on. So I think that's one bit. And how we're addressing that, I think, as a team is working closely together to try and, as I said, it's my key phrase at the moment, work at pace, but to make a real difference to the children and young people within our communities.
I just wanted to come in if I could. I think it's important to recognise that this isn't NNC driven. This is about schools, and it's about children and young people attending school. So really, while we can work and support and try and influence it, it isn't held by one team, one department. Actually, it's a collective responsibility, young people going to school. I think the work that we've alluded to before around relational practice and around trauma-informed spaces is about belonging. Some of our young people don't feel that they belong, and therefore they don't attend. And as things become more difficult, or they perceive demands, whether they're there or not, those perceived demands lead to absence, lead to anxiety, lead to challenge. And I think it's a bigger picture. You know, if you look at children that are persistently absent as 6 or 7 year old, they're your future children that aren't in education and employment. So there's a bigger piece of work, that's a national piece of work really, but it's about trying to identify why do young people who are 4, 5 and 6 start not attending school. Well, at that age, that's parental influence and carer influence, isn't it? So it's about, again, driving forward the importance of school and education, but again, not everybody finds an academic approach accessible. So again, there's a lot of discussion, isn't there, nationally around enrichment and, you know, extracurricular activities and that holistic approach so that young people again feel they belong and they can be successful. So I think it is part of a bigger jigsaw about creating a space where children feel they belong, that they're part of a community, that they feel included, and that they feel that they can access. So again, you know, if you're going into learning and you're being presented with page 7, if you can do page 7, that's fine, but if you've already done it or you can't do it, then you're not learning and you don't want to be there. So it's a bigger piece of work around approaches. And similarly, young people do find a primary school setting more accessible for a variety of reasons. Not everybody, but generally. Whereas actually there are more demands in secondary. You go from having to engage with 13, 14 different people, higher demands, higher pressure, perhaps a narrow curriculum, which doesn't necessarily suit all. So that's why we have like a cliff edge, really, where we have all of our percentages increase when you get to Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. So there is work that's in its infancy, it's not embedded, but there's definitely an intent to create a better space.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Julie?
Thank you, Chair. Some of the questions I was going to ask, I think, have been answered when you answered Councillor Mundy's queries. I'm looking at elective home education, the reasons why it's increasing. I think you've answered a lot of that. Some of it might be the parent prefers. I don't know. Can you elaborate on that a bit more? Also, how robust is the oversight of the EHE to ensure all children receive a suitable education? And what actions are taken when this is not the case? How do you measure how well somebody that's home educated compared to someone that's at school? And also, what pathways exist for reintegration and getting children back into the school system where socialising is just as important?
So in terms of the oversight of elective home education, we have a really strong elective home education team. The threshold for good enough education is very, very different between education at home compared to what you'd have at school. It needs to be aptitude and so on, but the baseline is quite low from a legal perspective. So it wouldn't be like for like what a child would necessarily be receiving at school. It'd be very personalised. But the elective home education team works particularly hard with families around making sure that whatever education they're delivering is robust. And when it's not, we act swiftly in terms of school attendance orders and making sure children return to school. And we work closely with admissions around that. We also essentially RAG rate red, amber and green about whether or not we feel satisfied about a child's receipt of education at home when they're electively home educated. And as I said, if we are unsatisfied but giving the parents and carers opportunities to address that, we will move swiftly to move a child back into school as quickly as possible. And we do have cases where parents and carers may have made a choice to elective home educate, but not what I would call a positive choice. And in that instance, I've spoken about it today, we will draw upon the wider team about what's a supportive mechanism to help this child return to school. So looking at different programmes of support across the local authority rather than just sitting in education. So family support, for example, might be what's necessary, not actually about the child themselves. I know that Amanda has done work in terms of the data about why parents and carers are choosing elective home education. I don't know if you know the data offhand.
I do. So in August, we had 1,070 children who were electively home educated. And out of those, our biggest group were citing mental health needs. So there were 321 of those young people that said that they'd chosen to go, or families, elective home educated for special educational needs reasons. 223 were mental health needs, and 183 of these young people were in secondary. We had 69 children or families that said that they were dissatisfied with the way that their child was being supported in school from a SEND point of view, and 42 of those were secondary. So that in total equated to 30% of those young people making the decision to be electively home educated around sort of special educational needs. We have, in August, the data showed that we had 123 young people with educational healthcare plans that were also being electively home educated, where the parents had chosen then to move their child from a school. Again, that will come down to reasons where perhaps they feel their needs aren't being best met, and or, as Sarah has alluded to, that emotional-based school non-attendance, where actually the anxiety of being in a school setting is too much. So that's where we would put in place education other than at school packages, or we would look at alternative provision and other ways of supporting. What we have tried to do as part of an elective home education steering group is really look at how we can get some of these young people back into school. So we've looked at locality, and we could bring that as well as a future point. But what we did was we looked at the locality and to see where we had sufficiency needs. And actually this ties into a bigger picture around sufficiency in NNC. So there is a significant lack of sufficiency, and some of you that I'm sure have been through exec will see the papers around capital and the need to build and develop schools equally in a climate where there isn't any money. So that's a real challenge. We've got quite a lot of migration into North Hants. We don't have enough spaces for children. We don't have enough spaces in secondary, which again doesn't help either with the elective home education and that secondary route. So there's a real challenge around that, because working in a space where obviously there isn't sufficiency, but equally in a space where there isn't any funding, and there isn't funding coming through from the Department of Education at the moment around that either. So then it falls on councils to fund that. When you haven't got a budget, that's very difficult. So I think it does lead to some difficult conversations, but there is a lack of sufficiency in secondary, which is why we're often seeing as well that pinch point where we're trying to get young people back into school, but there isn't a space for them to go back to. What we did in the summer was target the areas where we knew that there were spaces. So we had a pilot programme where we targeted 12 to 20 primary school children, for example, in spaces where we knew that there were sufficiency in those schools, and some of those children have returned. We also, though, need to see this against a space where it links to all the other pieces of work that we've talked about already, really. Some people don't feel that they belong, so actually they don't want to be in a school setting. So if we can put the training, we can put the relational practice, and we can put all the other things together and create a space where teachers feel skilled, where children feel that they belong, and families have trust in the system, we can get more children back to school. And we can get more children being successful. But we can't do one of those pieces in isolation because it won't work. So it is very much about having that jigsaw approach where all of these pieces come online together, and then young people feel that they can be successful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trevor, then Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are mainly about EHE as well. On the charts you provided within the report, the earlier charts you're showing primary school trends, secondary school trends, and national trends. When it comes to the EHE chart, it just shows our figures. There's no national trend for us to compare about. Are our figures where they're showing a steady climb over the years, are they matching to national trends? Or are our figures for home educated students more substantial than national, lower than national? Is there some comparison?
So there is a general increase nationally. Only recently, I think this week in Schools Week, there was some commentary around actually local authorities not necessarily monitoring elective home education particularly effectively. So the kind of broader data sets might be more challenging to acknowledge, but I don't know, Amanda, if you have a sense of how it compares with the data.
It's growing, so it's increasing here, yeah. And then from a sort of a locality point of view, it is fairly evenly split, but it's mostly Kettering, and again there's sufficiency challenges in Kettering, and we see growth in years 8, 10 and 11. So basically that late Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 to Key Stage 4, so that upper end of secondary.
Which would echo the national picture around elective home education, and it kind of spikes around those points. I think potentially it's what you were talking about earlier around the kind of the increasing complexities around the curriculum as you and children might struggle, whereas at primary schools you might be more supported. It's smaller environments. It's more able to be controlled in lots of different ways, whereas transition into secondary can become quite challenging for some children, especially those that might be more vulnerable in terms of anxiety or special educational needs as well. So it probably does reflect a more national picture. And I think elective home education has increased post-COVID as well. Some children really enjoyed learning from home, and we must kind of acknowledge that as well, and it suited them as families. And I'm not so worried about the children whose parents, it's a positive choice for them. What I'm concerned about is where parents, it's not really elective home education, it feels forced upon them for various different reasons.
And then just linked in as well to, again, the EHE. Are there breakdowns, again, similar to the other report, are there breakdowns for specific schools? Are there breakdowns in primary school home education compared to secondary home education? Are there, sorry to stack the questions, are there then links to specific schools? So, for example, I'm not going to name schools, but we've got schools in Corby, there are schools in Kettering that are locally amongst our residents deemed as poor schools, schools that they don't want their kids to go to. They don't select those schools. Those schools then are the only schools that have places left available when selection is taken. Kids are then being put into those schools if they don't get their choice of schools. Is there then analysis that if those schools are being selected for students, that they're then being pulled out of school into home education as a result of being placed at a school that parents don't want their kids to be going to, based on the perception of those schools?
We have data on trusts, so collectively we wouldn't necessarily single out at this level in the sense of a school, but we do, from a trust point of view, track persistent attendance, severe absence, elective home education, any kind of exclusion. So we have all that data, and we recognise that some schools are in spaces that are more challenging than others, and it isn't necessarily to do with, and they might equally have an Ofsted judgment that isn't as positive as others, but again, they are working in a space that's more challenging. I think it is always difficult, having been a head teacher and an exec head, it is difficult if you're a school that isn't full, because then perhaps, there are probability that you might then have additional young people that have additional needs, which creates spaces where there is, again, more challenge and more pressure on that space, and then that comes down to funding and support. So I think within trusts, every CEO and every school improvement team within that will be working to improve those schools and to support those schools. And equally, as a local authority, we will be doing the same with our spaces. But again, it is also about getting the funding right and getting the support right. And equally serving your community. If your community has a greater level of deprivation or challenge, then it's going to be a harder space for you to necessarily be successful in. But again, from a scrutiny point of view, we would just share with you top-line data, but to reassure you that below that there is that finer detail. And they are those conversations and that support that we put in place to sort of try and support settings to improve.
Wendy?
Thank you. I can understand why a child or young person who is struggling either academically or socially may not want to go to school. And as the report acknowledges, early help and support for additional needs and strong partnerships working between schools, trusts, the local authority and parents and carers is vitally important. But I've always strongly believed that schools should offer children and young people the opportunity to excel and thrive and achieve in areas that may not be academic, and that is something that child or young person enjoys, and it then builds their confidence in, when you talked about maybe they feel they don't belong, but if you thrive in an area, and we're not all good at the same thing, which would be which is just as well, but I think all you children and young people are good at something, and I think if they can find what that is, whether sport, art, music, whatever, I think it gives them the confidence. And I just wonder how much of that is sort of going on to help those pupils that don't want to be at school.
I think everybody here that's been in education would second that. Having led in those spaces, what you want is an experiential offer where everybody is supported to be successful at the next stage, and it's enriching, and it offers experiences outside of the academic core subjects. The challenge you have is that as young people move through education, the way that they're judged becomes more restricted, and when you have a system where you're part of a league table by the end of Key Stage 4, and it's on whether you've achieved maths and English at grade 4 or above, then level 4 and above, then that's what you're going to end up really targeting. Again, going back to the comment before, what measured gets done. And it isn't through a choice of any of those head teachers or those CEOs to narrow their curriculum. But again, it comes back to teacher recruitment as well. And nationally, I think that there's a shortage of music teachers, there's a shortage in art. So again, schools want to offer that, trusts want to offer a broad curriculum so to maintain schools. It's all those other challenges and that factor. I think the curriculum review that's recently been carried out, and obviously there's some discussion between what's been done from the curriculum review and then what the Department of Education want to do, so I think that would depend what comes out. But it very much is around developing the curriculum to ensure that enrichment. But the challenge is that so much keeps being put into a national curriculum that there's only 6.5 hours in the day, and some of that is a lunch and a break. So you can't fix everything in school. And that's the difficulty for schools. Teachers work very hard for much longer hours than they're in there for. to try and deliver the best that they can in a space where really it's pitched against them and it's difficult, and sometimes young people don't want to go. There's lots of discussion around parenting, isn't there? And there's about that 0 to 5 space and children being ready and arriving, toilet trained, arriving, being able to, converse. So I think there's lots of other factors that impact that, but absolutely agree with you wholeheartedly. It should be a space where you can find you, whatever that might be, you find something that makes you want to go.
Thank you very much. Vicky?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Chairman, it was only really just to say, and it follows on from Wendy's point, really, it was what you were saying earlier, Amanda, about, creating a welcoming place, creating inclusivity, making a space where children want to actually come to school, and that's a challenge, isn't it, really? And it would be good to see how you're getting on with that as part of this scrutiny committee going forward, Chairman, if we can, have again an opportunity to see how, a reflection actually on how you're getting on in 12 months or so. Thank you.
It'd be really helpful if Charlotte could talk about the RAISE programme, actually, because that's all about that. It's about developing those relationships and that belonging.
Yes, it's well timed. So we have developed a programme in North Northamptonshire, not just the council. We've got partnerships outside the council. So it's a local area commitment to this, which is called the RAISE programme, standing for Relational and Inclusive Approaches for Successful Education. So we've written the programme. We have delivered that programme to 3 pilot schools across just before the summer and across this autumn term, and we're rolling the programme out to 18 schools that have signed up from January, and then we'll have a phase 2 of the programme from September next year. We've started taking sign up from schools for that programme as well. And the idea behind the programme is we spend the first year looking at relational approaches, and we spend the second year looking at trauma-informed approaches, so sort of an added layer onto that. We're not just delivering it as a training programme, so we're not just going in and offering some training and then leaving, because we know that that's not really what's needed and that's not what will be successful. The programme starts with work with the senior leadership team in the school, looking at what they want to achieve from the programme. We then deliver training to the whole school staff, and that is the whole school staff, so the lunchtime supervisor, the teaching assistant, absolutely everybody in the school, around what relational practice looks like working with children. And then we move, following from the training, we move into a bespoke programme where the school gets to choose what we follow up with them. So they've got a menu of options that they might look through. So they might choose to look at restorative language, or they might choose to look at a nurture provision, and then we'll go in and support helping them on their journey to become more relational. I think the fact that we've already had 18 schools sign up, and we had 30 interested initially, but for various reasons some of them couldn't commit this year, I think it's testament to our schools want to get this right. There is an absolute, I don't think any of our schools are saying we don't want to create a really great environment where we're giving a sense of belonging. But the environment's changed. It's changed. Our young people have changed. Needs have changed. And I think they're in a space now where they're really kind of willing to work with us on that. So hopefully that programme will show good results. We are obviously evaluating the results of that, and very happy to bring that back to scrutiny.
Thank you very much. Julie, and then followed by Maurice afterwards.
Just quickly, I think you answered quite a bit of my question there when you answered Councillor Jessup. Everyone always, it seems to be focusing around the child or the parents, but do you notice anything with the school, like one school's better than the other at dealing with children? Do some schools seem to exclude children more often, whereas other schools wouldn't? Because back when I was younger growing up, you hardly ever heard of an exclusion. I think when I was at school, I heard of one. There was one when I was at school that I heard of. And I just wonder, is it partly the schools as not just the children?
I
I think it would be amiss of us to say that problems just lie with the children themselves and that's why they get excluded. I know that's probably not a very popular opinion, but I think that children might respond in ways that are unexpected or undesirable, and then schools will respond to them in various different ways depending on a whole range of factors. So it might be their particular approach, it might be about their cohorts, but we are limited in our ability to raise our concerns about those exclusions because there's a particular remit in which we work. So if a child is excluded from school, they have what's called a governor's discipline committee, where whether or not the exclusion is seen as proportionate, fair, and whether or not it's because a child has special educational needs. And the Governor's Discipline Committee, the GDC, meet and they will scrutinise the head teacher's thoughts around it and the intervention and support. Now, the GDCs will be variable in how much they hold a head teacher's exclusion to account, I would argue. But we as a local authority cannot force a school to take a child back. And anyway, I think that sends an interesting message around belonging that we've already discussed. So we are limited in what we can do. But I wouldn't say that a child's exclusion is just within the child. I think it's part of a wider system. And I think, unfortunately, we are limited in our powers, and that's more a conversation, I think, for the Department for Education to look at their policies and how it's enacted through processes. Parents do have a right to go to an independent review panel but even the independent review panel after the Governor's Discipline Committee cannot force a school to take a child back after they're excluded. They can just ask them to review the decision made. And some schools, in my 23 years experience, will only... I've only had one school take a child back after an IRP said that it was for them to reconsider the exclusion. So... But definitely children did get excluded your age as well, but they probably disappeared and it probably wasn't monitored in the same way.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to come in as well, just to add to, we do recognise that there are more challenges in society, there are more challenges in school, there are more demands in line with the curriculum, in line with the way schools are measured, the ways that they're held to account. And that creates pressure points. It's recognised nationally that there has been some changes in behaviour and anxiety and the way that young people communicate, because that's obviously what their behaviour is. It's communicating that they're not coping. And there's also recognised nationally that the parenting's changed. And I think that there was recently a chief executive who said, what's happening with parenting. 10, 15 years ago, we've seen a real shift in those young people now in school. There is more challenge. So I think that there is that in the space that we're working in as well, nationally and locally. But what we've tried to do as a local authority is recognise the fact that our data isn't positive, and recognise that we need to do some significant things to make some changes, hence the RAISE, hence the education improvement framework, but also our own exclusion and suspensions guidance, which really focuses on that universal, what you can do whenever a child is at risk. Because once a child starts to have a reduced or a part-time timetable where they're not attending all the time, they're already at risk of being excluded. Once that breaks down, then that child is on a pathway and undeniably ends up being suspended or excluded. So what we've tried to do through the guidance is step in and say that at this point, we need to look at other things. So we've created a guidance document that signposts lots of things. There's lots going on in the local authority and locally and nationally, especially with health and our partners, that schools could access. But often it's about signposting. So the universal part of that guidance talks about that, what you can do, who you can reach out to. And then we piloted it early in the year, but we've now introduced the care panel, which is those children at risk of exclusion. And we tried that with some schools in the summer to see, there's 2 stages to that. So you've got the stage where you're looking for information and guidance. What else can we do? What else do you know about? And then that comes with it some funding. If we can, maybe some mentoring or something else for the child, we can then put it through our school inclusion funding panel. And then equally, there's the crisis stage, you know, where you're in school, a child has done X, and actually you're going to need to exclude them, or you feel that you need to because you don't know what else to do. At that crisis stage, again, this virtual room can be convened, which has a psychologist and other key partners in it, to talk about what else could we do for this young person. They used to be called strategic groups or strategic panels, but it's the same thing. So the guidance offers that universal and that targeted and that specialist support, again, to try and change the trend, because what we've been doing so far hasn't worked. So we need to try something different that, again, front loads that early help service and that early help support, so that we're recognising, why is this child communicating this? And if it is from a school's point of view, because perhaps it's a policy or it's an ethos, again, not to say that is, but that can be a factor too. We hope that the RAISE piece of work, again, will support schools, and we will be giving that. Again, that's a free programme, and it's a way that we're saying, look, we're here on this journey with you, but we can't do it to them, we have to do it together, because it has to be a systemic change. It has to be bought into for it to be successful.
Thank you very much. Maurice, then yourself, Steve.
Good evening, thank you. I've got two questions. I've been hearing on the radio quite a lot lately, because of the whole COVID thing's been going through Parliament at the minute with the COVID inquiry. Is there any children what have fallen through the system and been missed off, or any records, or any kids what have not been brought back from the pandemic still being truant with that sort of thing? And I've got my second question is, you started going into it, are we working with health partners to help kids with anxiety issues, and what are we doing to help them get back into school?
Sarah could probably come in around children missing in education, but we do track children that are missing. We do to find out where those young people are and why they're not in school. We also have, children without a school place as well, so we track those. We try and have a safeguarding and an oversight for those. Linking it back briefly before Sarah comes in, from an elective home education point of view, we have very little power. If a child has a social worker, then of course there's oversight, or if a child has an educational healthcare plan, there is an oversight. But there's a huge group in the middle that are kind of invisible. So what we've done as a steering group as well is put together a best practice document, although whilst we can't mandate it, because we've checked with our sort of legal colleagues, we are saying that we want to have an increased interaction. So we've created, we're linking with libraries locally to have elective home education drop-ins, to have career sessions. We've set up elective home education taster sessions with local colleges, where just those young people that are electively home educated can go, again, trying to get them back into education. So there's lots of different ways in which we're trying to gain oversight. Did you want to come in around children missing education?
So yes, in terms of children missing education, worked hard in terms of making sure that the policy was tight in terms of that safeguarding lens to make sure that we weren't missing any children. We also have the Children Out of School Education Panel, the COSI panel, where we have multidisciplinary oversight. So we do have NHS on there. We're just finalising our data sharing agreements to make sure that we can oversee medical records as well, to make sure everyone feels confident about that. So we do have a multi-agency approach. We also have the emotional-based school non-attendance toolkit that has been developed to support and working with the ed psychs around children's readiness to return to school and what that looks like. So we strongly look at a multi-disciplinary approach to be able to support that as well.
But just to say, nationally there will have been children that were missed, hence the serious case review, where children were perhaps seen as being elective home education, but there was no oversight. So it's about linking with social care, and we have risk assessments that as well we work with social care, so if they see a child then they inform us about that as well. So we are, I think, with the SEND inspection and the work we're doing around improving SEND and general local area partnerships, it's a stronger relationship now with health and social care and education around actually what's happening for young people, and if they are at risk, that we're sharing that intelligence and we're making sure that we're monitoring so that we don't miss young people, so that we are aware of where they are and that they're safe.
Do we have a percentage of how many children are missing off the system? Or we got track of everyone?
We would have, but I wouldn't have it here with me now. We've recently done a piece of work as well, because the government's definition of children missing in education has recently changed as well. So that's brought in more young people as well, and that sort of a link around care. So, but that is something we wouldn't have now, but we do have within the service that we could bring or share as an information paper.
Yeah, if you can, please.
This is really interesting tonight, really interesting. And I just wanted to look back in the past, because I think we all have experience of schools and we're all in a certain way experts about education. But are we seeing a greater number in reality of exclusions than in the past? I want you to comment on that. The other thing I'd be quite interested in is exclusion could be a way of dealing with a problem. So are there organisations that have a more liberal attitude and less patience with students? And once the school's made that decision, you've almost set up a student for a fall.
So, a couple of bits. I don't think there are, well, it would depend on the setting. Some local authorities have very little exclusion or a zero tolerance in the sense of their own exclusions. Some areas where I've worked in before, they've had service level agreements where they've actually used their Section 19 money, given it back to secondary schools, and had a we won't exclude policy. So they're kind of front loading and saying, look, you might have 5 children, we'll pay you for 5 children. So that creates a different space, and that's a really positive way of doing that, because all schools sign up to that. So that then itself brings down exclusions. I think we are also in a space where we're in a digital world, where young people are growing up in a space where everything's immediate, and it's that immediate gratification, and actually sustaining learning sometimes can be a challenge. Sustaining relationships can be a challenge. So I think that, and you know, nationally and locally perhaps there is research around social skills and relational practice, which again can impact exclusions. I think there's also been a recognition that perhaps, going back to what you were saying about when you were younger, and Sarah said children perhaps were just what we call off-rolled. They were encouraged not to keep going, or when the exams were coming up or there was an inspection, they were encouraged not to be there anymore. And I think that's been recognised, you know, not recently, but around off-rolling, that actually that's illegal. So there are conversations around that as well, and that's obviously something that we and also nationally need to, you know, enforce, to make sure that if a young person isn't at school, there's a paper trail as to why they're not there, and there are reasons. Children can't just disappear when visitors are coming, etc. So I think there's about creating greater rigour generally. But I think I would like to think, and I'd be reassured, that every head teacher goes into the job to create an inclusive space, and it's to create an environment where they like children and they want children to be there. But equally, being realistic, there are spaces that are more inclusive than others. So it's not to say that they can't get there, they're just on different parts of their journey. Some spaces have got it right, and they're getting it right, and their ethos is fully embedded. Other settings are on their journey. And I think, although there might be positives and negatives perhaps to Ofsted, and people will all have their opinion around Ofsted, that the changes to put inclusion at the centre, I think, will be a positive, because it can't just be about attainment. It can't just be about that as a benchmark. It needs to be about how you're supporting young people to be successful in the workplace and to be successful citizens. And that's not just about attainment. That's not just about outcomes.
Thank you very much. Councillors, I'm not sure whether we need a debate on this, in the sense of, does anyone have any amendment alterations or want to add any recommendations? So I've taken on yours already.
It was more about the percentage of the children being missed off with COVID.
Oh, in terms of how many children post-COVID viral infection? I mean, I don't know is the quick answer. That data will be difficult to assess. I mean, Northamptonshire hospital and outreach education might have that, but it might fit within fatigue and things like that.
But we can put something together from an information paper and submit it to you.
Thank you much. Anything else at all? Anyone? We'll move on. It's recommended that the Children and Family Scrutiny Committee note the following. The finding of this report on inclusion across Northamptonshire, particularly trends in attendance, persistent absence, suspensions, permanent exclusions and effective home education, or EHE. And can I have a proposer and a seconder? Okay, Maurice and Steve. All those in favour? Carried. I was going to, that's what I if Callum's watching, you're not having another night off. I'll read them all out, one after the other, and then we'll do a vote on that. Okay, so support the development of a target improvement plan that draws together findings from analysis and alternative positions, APs, review, with the focus on early intervention, reactive practices, and reducing the needs for exclusion and or movement to EHE. Endorse the continued implementation of the alternative provision plan, ensuring to sustainable high AP offer that meets local need and aligns with Department of Education and Ofsted. Continued focus on inclusion, support the requests and the local authority and partners work collaboratively with schools, trust and health services to establish a sustainable approach to improve attendance and reduce suspension and exclusions. Requested a further update to scrutiny in 12 months, providing cooperative data to evaluate progress in inclusion outcomes, attendance, AP usage and sustainable indicators. Can I have a proposer and a seconder? Thanks, Chris. And seconder? Maurice. All those in favour? Carried. Moving on, number 6 in the agenda. Virtual School Head Annual Report. I'd like to invite Charlotte Franks, Virtual School Head, to introduce the item, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I thought I'd start off by just giving a very quick overview about what the virtual school does, because it's a lesser known service, I would say, within the council. So the virtual school has a very unhelpful title in this day and age when we do actually have virtual schools, because we are not a school. So it's a slightly unhelpful title. So the virtual school is a service within the local authority that has the primary duty to promote the education of children in care. So we are an advocacy service. So we monitor all children in care within the local authority and West Northamptonshire, because we're a shared service over both local authorities. And we monitor those as if they attended a single school. So we track all of the children wherever they go to school, and we monitor what they're doing to ensure that they are getting the best support within school. And we do that via a huge number of mechanisms. So our role is about promoting their education attainment, that they're included in education, that people are being aspirational for them. The annual report we get the pleasure of producing every year. I have to say this is the draft annual report at this stage because it has to be signed off by the Corporate Parenting Board to be a final annual report, and that doesn't get done until later on in the year. So when we were asked to come to Scrutiny Committee today, it was quite well timed because we've just finished our draft annual report, so that's what I thought would be best to present to give you a bit of a flavour of the work that we do. Virtual schools have been in place since 2014. It is the virtual school head, so my role within the local authorities is a statutory role within every local authority, so every local authority will have a virtual school and a virtual school head. So why does it matter? So children in care need that additional advocacy for their education as the corporate parent. So we're all corporate parents as part of the council, and we are the education hat of that corporate parent. So we are advocating for those children from a parent's perspective to ensure that they are getting the best opportunities available to them. We have an additional non-statutory duty to promote the education of children with a social worker. That is a new duty, but that is a strategic duty. We don't monitor those children on an individual basis. We do have also a statutory duty to monitor the education and promote the education of previously looked after children, so children who have been adopted or children who are on a special guardianship order. But again, that's a strategic role. It's not on a case level basis. The only case level work that we do is with children in care. Now, we are really conscious of a service about relationships. Relationships is really key to everything that we do, but we're not a service that can have the relationships with those children because we're relatively small and we've got a lot of children. So we do that by guiding the others rather than us having that one-to-one relationship with any of them, our children. Our main mechanism for monitoring the education of our children is through a statutory process that all schools have to conduct or settings have to conduct called a personal education plan. So it's a little bit like an education, health and care plan annual review, but it's a personal education plan, and that is reviewed 3 times a year. So once each term, the school and the professionals around the child will come together to discuss what's happening with the child, to discuss their progress, to discuss their needs, their targets, their aspirations, and our service monitors that process, and we quality assure every single one of those plans to ensure that they're really robust and good plans. So who are our children? So the data in this report is in relation to Northamptonshire children only, so children who are in care to Northamptonshire, but they may be living elsewhere. But it's those children. So we do a separate report for West Northamptonshire. So the children, we've got 573, or at the end of the academic year, we had 570 young people who are in care. Of those, 374 are of school age, so are currently within the school age. Then we've got some that are younger than that and some that are older than that. Of that cohort, 60% of the cohort have an identified SEND need, and 36% of the cohort have an education, health and care plan. So nationally, children in care are more likely to have special educational need than their peers, and are more likely to have a social, emotional and mental health need than their peers in particular. So that is the highest level of need that we tend to find with our children in care. And a lot of that is as a result of their pre-care experiences or their experience of coming into care, all of which may have caused trauma for that child that's impacted on their ability to learn. We have 42 children from that cohort that are unaccompanied asylum-seeking children that we also support. And from that cohort, 62% of the school-age cohort were attending schools in North Northamptonshire, with the other 40-ish% attending and living in schools elsewhere. So in terms of our key achievements within the virtual school, PEP, which is the personal education plans that I was referring to earlier, compliance and quality for that has been consistently good for within our service for a number of years. So of school-age children, we have 98% compliance with ensuring that those PEPs are conducted 3 times a year. For our early years cohort, that was 100% compliance with our early years young people. And for post-16, it was 91%. These are really high. There isn't a national benchmark for looking at PEP compliance, but I know from working with our regional colleagues, we are very good at this in North Northamptonshire. In terms of the quality of PEPs, that's been growing. That's been a priority of ours for a number of years, and that's been growing year on year. And we measured 86% of our PEPs as good last year. But what we keep doing is we keep raising the bar of what good looks like. So each year we're kind of getting towards that 80% threshold. We increase more, we expect more from what is put into that personal education plan. So those 86% of PEPs, they really are good. They are very, very good. So areas that it might not be good is if the child's voice has not been part of that PEP, we wouldn't then quality assure that as being a good PEP. Other key areas of achievement is that we have some strong partnerships in collaboration with other services, in particular educational psychology. We're doing a lot of work with our educational psychology services, both in North and West Northants, to put on programmes that we fund for schools to take part in. So we utilise our funding to support that being an accessible programme for schools, because we recognise the impact that can have on children in care and children with a social worker. So these are programmes such as our emotional literacy support programme, or mediated learning support, which is a new programme that helps understand how children learn and ensuring that they're ready to learn. We have had, and this sounds like a very unusual one to say is an achievement, but we've managed to stay stable and consistent in what has been a really turbulent picture. So we know that we've had some turbulence in the local authorities. Obviously, we've disaggregated. We've had a children's trust come out. We've had several inspections that have determined that services are not where they should be. We've had growing need in our cohorts, all of the things that we've talked about earlier. And I think despite all of that, we've remained a really consistent service. So an unusual one that I wouldn't normally put as an achievement, but that is. We've done quite a lot of work exploring AI and using tools such as Power BI to move from data collection into more analysis. So there's quite a lot of space work going on in sort of the more innovative work and how we can have quicker access to data and to analyse that. We do have challenges. We absolutely do have challenges. Our challenges tend to replicate what is the challenge for all children, but they tend to be worse for our children. So attendance, for example, is a real concern of ours. It is on a downward trend for the last 3 years, which is concerning. We've not been able to recover attendance post-COVID. That has been really, really difficult. We are mirroring the national trend of attendance for children in care, but we are slightly below where the national trend is. So we're mirroring the downward trajectory, but we are slightly below what is national. So that is a concern and a priority for us. We also have a concern that, again, the picture across Northamptonshire is that we have an increasing cohort of young people who are not in education, employment and training. And again, our cohort replicates that trend. That we had 29% of young people last year that were not in education, employment or training between the ages of 16 and 18, because we only monitor cohort up until the age of 18. We do a lot of work into understanding why that is, what the opportunities are. We had a bespoke session at the Education Aspirations Board this time round looking at that post-16 cohort and why some of our young people are not engaging. And I think, again, similar to all of the conversations that we've had in the committee this evening, it is around that engagement. We have got lots of offers for young people, But if a young person has disengaged with education in year 8, year 9, year 10, then it doesn't matter what the offer looks like at post-16, they're not going to be in a place where they're able to take up that offer. So it is a lot of the work that we're doing is about engagement at a younger age, because we know that that is the biggest predictor of whether they go on to something meaningful post-16. We have been, in terms of what we've been working towards and new things this year, we're trying to increase our opportunities for young people to participate. So we're creating meaningful activities for them in partnership with the Northamptonshire Children's Trust. We are working in a new area in terms of speech and language for our early years cohort in particular. So how can we screen them earlier to see whether or not there are speech and language and communication challenges at an earlier age, and what support can we wrap around really early on to help support them into education. So there's lots of kind of areas that we're working on and prioritising this year, which are obviously in the report as well. I will stop there and take questions. I was trying to keep that really quick, and I don't think I was as quick as I'd hoped to be, so apologies for that. But yeah, I'll stop there for any questions, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. One thing I would like to add, that I've been on many a PEP, and just to let the panel know, in my previous area where I was living, which I won't mention because that's unfair on Suffolk, is that it is a lot different up here. Yeah, it has been enjoyable, and it is actually a lot more consistent, and the improvements throughout the years I've been up here, it has been unbelievable, and there has been a lot of work in it, and as carers we don't tend to praise virtual school as much as we possibly should, but they work in the background, and they have been doing an absolute fantastic job. So, Wendy?
Well, I haven't really got a question, but there's a lot of really good reading in here, and there were two things that jumped out at me. I was really pleased to see that the virtual school is enhancing the provision and the service for post-16 to better improve education, employment and training, or engagement in those areas. And as you've just said, Chair, I mean, the PEPs, the percentage of the PEPs that are completed is absolutely excellent. I think we should congratulate all those who've been involved in that achievement over the years.
Thank you.
Julie?
Thank you. I'm interested in the post-16 group. So what's the current approach to support post-16 young people in education, employment and training? How are tailoring transition plans being developed and monitored for effectiveness? And what are the outcomes of the PP Plus projects and other pilot initiatives for this age group? I'm particularly interested in this because I have come across this group of young people in my past career when I worked for the Department of Work and Pensions. And I do know, not just in this area, in other areas of the country as well, but I did see a lot of them fall through the loop where they were getting no support. They had no aspiration to succeed or further education, better themselves, things like that.
Thank you. That's a really good question. There is a lot of work that goes into supporting young people post-16. So there is a statutory duty for schools to have a designated teacher that has to promote the education of children in care. There isn't a statutory duty for a post-16 institution to have a designated teacher in the same way. We have a grant, a Pupil Premium Plus grant for children in care of statutory school age. There isn't a grant for children that are post-16. We have got a bit of a pilot grant going on at the moment, but there isn't a grant. So they're not funded in the same way. There's not the same legislation in place for them. So in terms of carrots and sticks, they are not in place in the same way that they are for statutory school age young people. We have a dedicated education and achievement officer. So we have 2 officers that work solely in the post-16 space in our team. We've currently just gone out to advert for an additional achievement officer for post-16 in recognition of the cohort has grown in size as well, to ensure that we're best supporting. We have had some pilot funding, which is at the moment not guaranteed past the end of this financial year. And we've utilised that in a variety of different ways. So, go on.
Sorry, where's the pilot funding coming from?
So it's coming from the Department for Education. They ran a pilot with some local authorities in order to look at what local authorities could utilise post-16. Then they've expanded that out to all local authorities. But again, it's seen as a pilot funding, so it's not guaranteed for the future. So it's always really difficult when you're working with money when you don't know when that money's going to end, to plan anything sort of longer term. We are working with 2 local colleges that have the largest number of our young people on roll, and we've supported them with providing a member of staff that can not only help with conducting the PEPs, but can also help with retaining young people, because what we find is sometimes they go to college, the environment's really overwhelming for them and they can drop off. Our early indications this year that are, although the number of young people who have firstly engaged and enrolled on courses is somewhat problematic for us, the number of young people that have dropped out is less than it has been in previous years. So we're starting to see some of the fruits of that investment into those colleges, for example. We're constantly having conversations with other providers like adult education. What is it? How can we work better with them? We work obviously with the leaving care team in the trust. How can we transition and hand over better? So there is a lot of degree of scrutiny that goes into that space and work in that space. But it does go back to, if a child comes into care late, so a child comes into care at age 15 and 16, and they are already very, very disengaged with education, it is very difficult to get into a space where we've got a really great relationship with that young person to help them into something meaningful. That's where that duty for children with a social worker comes in, and why that's so important for us and a huge area of priority, because the worst attending group, so when we looked at attendance across the local authority, the poorest attending group are children who have got social, emotional and mental health difficulties, and children with a social worker. So children who have not yet come into care but have got a social worker generally are disengaged, have been quite disengaged with education. So it's all about that earlier support. How can we support our young people to understand the chances that education can give them? How can we work with our schools and providers to ensure that they are really, truly embedded into the culture of education before they move on to post-16?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just need to let members know and officers, the extension now is until 21:30 hours. Maurice?
Yeah, I'll just be quick then. Going on from what...
Sorry, Councillor Ugly, if we could just come in there. We need to have a show of hands to extend the guillotine.
If we can have a show of hands, please.
That's great, thank you, Chair. The meeting will then be extended till 9:30.
21:30.
Okay. Try again. Going on for where Julie was going with the post-16 lot, is there any, kids who aren't interested in going on with their education, is there any charities or groups we can get involved with to try and help kids get into apprenticeships and stuff like that? So where they're not engaging with education, we might be able to get them away from living on benefits for the rest of their life, and it does us all good as a culture then.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are organisations and charities and community interest groups within the local area that absolutely help support that. And there are specific ones for young people who've leaving care. So Right Resolutions, for example, which is a key partner with the local authority. The difficulty is again, we've got this this system that is set up around the need for qualifications. So lots of our young people might want to take up an apprenticeship, but lots of our young people don't have the grades at maths and English in order to be able to take up an apprenticeship. And employers are less likely to take a young person on an apprenticeship if they don't already have those qualifications, because the pass rate when you're at college to resit a GCSE is very, very low. It's very low to pass a second time round. So again, we've got some narrow options. We've also got courses that are qualification driven. So if a young person enrolls at college because they want to become a bricklayer, for example, the need is for them to get a qualification at the end of that course. That's how colleges are funded, for them achieving the qualification at the end of the course. So there's a lot of pressure there for the young person to be able to achieve. There's a lot of pressure for the colleges to have the child that's in a space ready to achieve. We've got a bit more of a lack of engagement style courses, and engagement style courses that can happen at various points in the year. So if you've missed your September to sort of October cut-off, there's very little opportunity that you can then take part in January, in March. You're almost waiting a full year to support. So we have done quite a lot of work at looking at what is available, but absolutely we need to be more creative with what's available and welcome sort of partners in that to create what could be available to our young people.
You're not thought about trying to get some sort of news article out about trying to ask for other companies and wider community if they can help out with trying to find apprenticeships for people coming out of care, so they're not at a disadvantage?
Yeah, so again, we have there has been some work on that, probably not enough, but there has been some work on that, and the council's done some work on that. But our young people are not always ready for an apprenticeship because they don't have the qualifications in order to get onto that apprenticeship. They're not work ready, a lot of these young people. They might have had some really challenging experiences that's turned them off of everything. And maintaining employment is difficult. So apprenticeships are not really always the answer. The answer might be more of these short courses to help a young person get into a space where they're ready to engage, help the young person get into a space where they understand and are able to get up every day and return to the same place and have that sort of drive to do that. So I think employers can support, but employers can only support probably our young people that are already on the trajectory to do something. It's our young people that are not that we need a greater deal of support with.
Trevor.
Hi there, thanks. That report's really detailed, so I really actually enjoyed reading it and getting all the details. I only got one point to make on here. You've got a very little section at the bottom, page 61, unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. Saying that we've got 42 in our care system at the moment. That seems like a large number. Is that proportionate in North Northampton compared to the spread of unaccompanied children across the rest of the UK? Because it just seems like a really high number compared to the number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children that appear to be arriving in the country.
So I wouldn't want to comment on our numbers of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in comparison to other local areas, because that's sort of more the Children's Trust space to comment on that. There is obviously the National Transfer Scheme, for example, which when young people are coming in, they are allocated to local authorities across the country. So these are not all children that have presented as unaccompanied in North Northamptonshire, for example. They might have been part of that National Transfer Scheme. Our unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people tend to be of older age group as well. So we have the vast majority of that, and I think the figures are in the report, aren't they? The vast majority of that cohort will be post-16, so they will be that 16 to 18 age. There will be a much smaller number of that, so I think it's, 36 of them are in that post-16 cohort. The smaller numbers that would be of education age do tend to be year 11, rarely year 10, very rarely year 9, not much before that. So they are always the much older cohort. So I don't know whether we are disproportionate in our numbers, but the National Transfer Scheme, the purpose of that is evening out those numbers, so that duty doesn't fall to particular local authorities that are on the coast, for example.
Thank you very much. Members, I don't know if anyone's got any recommendations that they'd like to bring in. I can only personally think of one, and that is, I don't think that the team can be separated, and I feel it should be back in 12 months' time with an update, because tonight has been absolutely fantastic, and it's really opened up our eyes, and also the members of public online, and give them real insight to what goes on behind the scenes, which we're not normally about. So that's something I would like to propose, is that we come back and that we invite you back, Charlotte, for 12 months' time with some new facts and figures. Do I have a seconder? Seems so. Chris, all in favour? Carried. Yeah, moving forward now. Item 6 of the agenda, Scrutiny Forward Work Programme. Can I ask members to note the contents of the Scrutiny Work Programme for the forthcoming meetings of Children, Young Persons and Education Scrutiny Committee. Can I confirm that you've been passed all that relevant information, Trevor? Good. Item 8, is there any other business? No. This is where it slightly changes. On approaching this festive season at the moment, if you find yourself with your loved ones at the Christmas table looking at each other and thinking we've got a spare place here or a spare place there, please think about maybe next year having a tiny Tim or a little Annie, because the sun will come out tomorrow. Please just think about maybe trying to give a loving home to a young person that is in care, whether you could adopt or even look at fostering. I don't think of any better present. So please think about it. And I'd like to close the meeting at 21:06. Thank you very much for everyone.